The sheriff's patrol car pulled up behind Karen's Mercedes as she sat fuming in front of my brand-new toll booth. Her face was crimson, her perfectly manicured nails gripping the steering wheel as she screamed through her open window. "You can't charge me to use this road. I'm the HOA vice president." Behind her, 17 cars were backed up, all residents who'd been using my private property as their personal shortcut for months. The digital toll sign blinked cheerfully. $5 per vehicle. Thank you for your business. This was the moment 3 months of legal warfare had been building toward, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. My name is Marcus Rivera, and I never wanted to be at war with my homeowners association. I'm a 42-year-old software engineer who works from home, and all I ever wanted was a quiet place to live and work. When I bought my property at 173 Meadowbrook Lane in March of 2023, I thought I'd found paradise. The house sat on 5 acres at the edge of the Sunset Ridge community, with a long private driveway that connected to both Meadowbrook Lane on one side and Oak Hill Road on the other. The previous owner had used it as a horse farm, and the driveway was basically a private road that cut through the property, about a quarter-mile long, beautifully paved and lined with old oak trees. The property deed was crystal clear. The driveway was mine, completely private, with no easements or right-of-way provisions. My real estate attorney had checked everything 3 times before I signed. The driveway didn't even appear on county road maps because it had always been private property. But apparently, for the past 15 years, while the property sat mostly vacant, neighbors had gotten into the habit of using my driveway as a convenient shortcut between Meadowbrook Lane and Oak Hill Road, shaving about 5 minutes off their commute. I didn't know any of this when I moved in. For the first 2 weeks, I was too busy unpacking and setting up my home office to notice the traffic. Then one morning in April of 2023, I was working in my front room when I counted 37 cars using my driveway between 7 and 9 in the morning. 37. They weren't just passing through slowly either. Some of them were doing at least 40 miles per hour, kicking up gravel near my garden beds. And one SUV nearly hit my cat, Shadow, who liked to sun himself near the driveway entrance. That afternoon, I walked down to the Sunset Ridge HOA office to introduce myself to Barbara Henderson, the HOA president. Barbara was a warm, professional woman in her late 50s with blonde hair, red-framed glasses, and a red blazer that seemed to be her signature look. Her office was organized and welcoming, with photos of community events covering one wall and a coffee maker that was always brewing. "Marcus, welcome to Sunset Ridge." Barbara stood up from her desk with a genuine smile, shaking my hand firmly. "I've been meaning to stop by and welcome you properly. How are you settling in?" "Pretty well, actually," I said, accepting her offer of coffee. "But I wanted to ask you about something. There's been a lot of traffic using my driveway as a shortcut. I counted 37 cars just this morning." Barbara's smile faded, replaced by a concerned frown. She set down her coffee mug and pulled out a community map. "Yes, I was afraid someone might have mentioned that to you. That's been an ongoing issue. The previous owner never lived there full-time, so residents just started using the driveway. It became a habit." She pointed to the map, showing how my property created a natural shortcut. "I should have sent someone to talk to you before you moved in." "That's my fault." "Well, it's my private property," I said carefully. "I'm not comfortable with all that traffic. Someone nearly hit my cat yesterday." Barbara nodded immediately, her red glasses catching the light. "You're absolutely right, and I apologize on behalf of the community. Your property, your rules. I'll send out a community-wide email today reminding everyone that your driveway is private property and must not be used without your permission." She was already typing notes on her computer. "I'll also put up signs at both entrances if you'd like." "That would be great," I said, relieved at how reasonable she was being. "Thank you for understanding." "Of course," Barbara said warmly, "and if anyone gives you trouble about it, you let me know immediately. We have rules in this community, and respecting private property is at the top of the list." I left that meeting feeling confident that the problem was solved. Barbara seemed like exactly the kind of HOA president you wanted: professional, fair, and respectful of boundaries. That afternoon, she was true to her word. A community-wide email went out explaining that my driveway was private property, and that using it without permission was trespassing. She even offered to organize a community meeting to discuss alternative routes if people were concerned about commute times. For 3 days, the traffic stopped almost completely. I saw Barbara's silver sedan pass by once, and she waved cheerfully. A few other residents who I'd met at the community welcome party also stopped using the shortcut without complaint. I thought the issue was resolved. Then I met Karen Walsh. Karen was the HOA vice president, and she was everything Barbara wasn't. Where Barbara was warm and professional, Karen was cold and entitled. She was in her early 40s, always dressed like she was heading to a country club, with perfectly styled dark hair and an expression that suggested the world was constantly disappointing her. She drove a white Mercedes SUV with a vanity plate that read HOPRO, and she treated every community issue like a personal offense. On the 4th day after Barbara's email, I was working in my home office when I heard a loud honking. I looked out the window to see Karen's Mercedes sitting in my driveway, and Karen herself standing outside my front door, repeatedly pressing my doorbell. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" "Yes, you can help me," Karen said sharply, not bothering with introductions. "You can stop blocking community access to this road. I've been using this route for 12 years, and I'm not about to add 20 minutes to my commute because you decided to throw your weight around." "This is my private property," I said calmly. "The driveway isn't a community road. It's part of my deed." Karen crossed her arms, her designer's sunglasses perched on top of her head. "That's a technicality. This road has been used by the community for over a decade. That establishes an implied easement. I'm a paralegal, so I know what I'm talking about." Actually, implied easements require continuous, open use for a specific period and under specific conditions that establish legal right, I countered. I'd done my research after buying the property. Since the previous owner never gave permission and the property was essentially vacant, there's no legal basis for an easement. Karen's face flushed red. "We'll see about that. I'm calling an emergency HOA board meeting, and we're going to address your hostile attitude toward this community. Barbara might be willing to coddle new residents, but I'm not." She turned on her expensive heels and stormed back to her Mercedes, then deliberately drove through my driveway anyway, accelerating hard enough to spray gravel across my front lawn. That evening, Barbara called me. "Marcus, I'm so sorry about Karen. She came to me this afternoon demanding we take action against you, and I had to remind her rather firmly that you're within your rights to protect your property." Barbara sighed. "She's calling a board meeting for tomorrow night, but I want you to know that I've already spoken to the other board members, and we all agree with you. This is your property, plain and simple." "Thank you, Barbara," I said, genuinely grateful. "I appreciate you backing me up." "It's not about backing you up. It's about doing what's right," Barbara said. "But I should warn you, Karen doesn't like being told no. She might try to make things difficult." Barbara's warning proved prophetic. The next morning, I woke up to find 5 cars using my driveway during the morning commute. When I walked outside to take down license plate numbers, I saw Karen's Mercedes leading the pack. She slowed down as she passed my house, rolled down her window, and called out, "Community property. Marcus, get used to it." By noon, I'd counted 23 cars using my driveway. The traffic was back to pre-email levels, and it was clear that Karen was organizing this as some kind of protest. I called Barbara immediately. "I see what's happening," Barbara said, her voice tight with frustration. "Kara sent out her own email this morning to a group she calls Concerned Residents, telling them to ignore my directive and continue using your driveway. She's claiming that I'm overstepping my authority as president." I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I'm handling this, Marcus, I promise you." That night's board meeting was held at the community center, and I attended at Barbara's invitation. The room was packed with at least 60 residents, which was apparently unusual for a regular board meeting. Karen had clearly mobilized her supporters. Barbara called the meeting to order, her red blazer and red-framed glasses making her look particularly authoritative behind the board table. Tonight's agenda includes one item: the use of Marcus Rivera's private driveway. Marcus has made it clear that he does not give permission for community members to use his property as a shortcut, which is entirely his right as the property owner." Karen immediately raised her hand, not waiting to be called on. "Barbara, with all due respect, this affects the entire community. We need to take a vote on whether Marcus is being a good neighbor or simply being selfish. We're not voting on someone's right to control their own property, Karen," Barbara said firmly. Her voice was professional, but had an edge to it. "That's not how property rights work. What we are going to discuss is whether anyone has a legitimate legal claim to an easement, which they don't, and how we can help the community adjust to using the proper roads." For the next 45 minutes, Karen and Barbara went back and forth. Karen kept insisting that community convenience trumped my property rights. Barbara kept calmly explaining that no, it absolutely did not, and that the HOA's job was to enforce community rules, not to violate the law by encouraging trespassing. Finally, Barbara called for a formal vote. Should the HOA support Marcus Rivera's right to restrict access to his private property? The vote was 7-2 in my favor, with Karen and one of her friends being the only dissenting votes. Karen stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This isn't over, Barbara and Marcus. You're going to regret moving into this community." She stormed out, and about 15 of her supporters followed. Barbara caught my eye across the room and gave me a small, tired smile. After the meeting, she pulled me aside in the parking lot. "I meant what I said earlier. I've got your back on this. Karen is going to try to make your life difficult, but she doesn't have the authority to do anything official. Just document everything she does, and let me know if she crosses any lines." "Thank you, Barbara," I said. "I really appreciate you standing up for what's right." "That's my job," Barbara said, adjusting her red glasses. "And between you and me, it's about time someone stood up to Karen. She's been pushing boundaries for years." I drove home that night feeling like I had a real ally in Barbara, but also knowing that Karen was going to escalate things, and I was right. The next morning, I woke up to find that someone had spray-painted selfies across my driveway gate in bright red letters. I stood there staring at the vandalism, my phone in my hand, debating whether to call the police or handle this another way. That's when I saw Karen's Mercedes driving slowly past my property on Meadowbrook Lane. She wasn't even trying to hide it. She slowed down, looked directly at me, smiled, and then accelerated away. The message was clear. She was declaring war. What she didn't know was that I'd already been researching something very interesting about private road rights in our state, something that was about to turn her little rebellion into the most expensive shortcut she'd ever taken. As I dialed my attorney's number, I was already smiling. Karen wanted to play games with my property. Fine. But she was going to learn that in this game, I made the rules, and I was about to change them in a way she never saw coming. What would you do if someone vandalized your property after you'd legally told them to stay away? Have you ever dealt with an entitled neighbor who thought rules didn't apply to them? Share your stories in the comments below. And if you want to see how Marcus turns the tables on Karen and her supporters, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on, because part 2 is coming soon. And trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when Marcus installs that toll booth. My attorney, David Chun, arrived at my house within 2 hours of my call. David was a property rights specialist I'd worked with during the home purchase, and he was exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted in a fight. Sharp, methodical, and absolutely relentless when it came to protecting his clients. He stood in my driveway, photographing the spray-painted vandalism from multiple angles, while I explained everything that had happened since I'd moved in. "This is textbook harassment and trespassing," David said, making notes on his tablet. "And the vandalism gives us criminal charges we can pursue if needed. But I think we can do something much more interesting." He smiled in a way that made me think Karen was about to have a very bad day. "Tell me something, Marcus. How would you feel about making money from this situation?" "What do you mean?" "Primera, asquid. Your property, your driveway, completely private, with no easements," David said, walking the length of the driveway and taking measurements with a laser tool. "In this state, you have the absolute right to control access to your private property. That includes charging fees for access. What I'm suggesting is that instead of just blocking the road, you install a toll booth and charge anyone who wants to use your shortcut." I stared at him. "A toll booth? Is that even legal?" "Completely legal," David said, pulling up documentation on his tablet. "Private toll roads have been part of American infrastructure since colonial times. As long as your road doesn't have any public easements, which yours doesn't, you can charge whatever you want for access. And here's the beautiful part. If anyone uses your road without paying, they're trespassing, and you can have them cited or even arrested." The idea was brilliant and petty in exactly the right way. Karen wanted to use my property as a shortcut. Fine. But it was going to cost her. How much could I charge? "Whatever you want," David said. "I'd suggest something reasonable enough that it doesn't look purely vindictive, but high enough that it makes the alternative route look attractive. $5 per vehicle would be my recommendation. That's about what many toll roads charge, and it adds up quickly if someone's using it twice a day for their commute." I did the math quickly in my head. If 20 cars were using my driveway daily, that would be $100 per day, $700 per week, roughly $3,000 per month. And knowing Karen's personality, she'd probably keep using it just out of spite, at least at first. "Let's do it." "Perfect," David said. "I'll draft the legal documentation today. We'll need proper signage at both entrances clearly stating that this is a private toll road, the fee amount, and that use without payment constitutes trespassing. We'll also need to set up a payment system, probably something electronic with cameras to document who pays and who doesn't. Give me 1 week, and we'll have everything ready to go." That afternoon, I filed a police report about the vandalism. The officer who responded was a middle-aged woman named Officer Patricia Martinez, and she was sympathetic but realistic. "I'll file the report, and we'll increase patrols in this area. But unless you have video evidence of who did it, there's not much we can prosecute. It's your word against theirs." "I understand," I said, "but I want it documented. And Officer Martinez, I should let you know that I'm installing security cameras throughout the property. If this happens again, I'll have evidence." "Smart move," she said, handing me a copy of the report. "And for what it's worth, you're within your rights to restrict access to your property. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." After she left, I called Barbara to update her on the situation. She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the frustration in her voice before she even spoke. "Marcus, I heard about the vandalism. I'm so sorry. This is completely unacceptable." Barbara sighed heavily. "I've been dealing with Karen all morning. She's been sending emails to residents claiming that you're trying to hold the community hostage, and she's organizing what she calls a protest where people will deliberately use your driveway to assert what she calls community access rights." "Let her," I said calmly. "In fact, I want you to know what I'm planning, Barbara, because I don't want you to be blindsided. I'm installing a toll booth. Anyone who wants to use my driveway will need to pay $5 per vehicle." There was a moment of silence, and then Barbara laughed. It was a genuine, delighted laugh. "Marcus, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, and completely legal." "Right. My attorney confirmed it this morning. The road is private property with no easement. I have every right to charge for access. This is going to drive Karen absolutely insane," Barbara said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "She's been so focused on the principle of the thing that she hasn't considered you might actually monetize it. When are you planning to set this up?" "About a week from now. I need to get the proper equipment installed and the legal documentation in place." "Well, you have my full support," Barbara said firmly. "And Marcus, I want you to know that at the next board meeting, I'm proposing that we add an explicit policy to the HOA bylaws about respecting private property. Karen's behavior has made it clear that we need something in writing that we can enforce." "Thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate everything you're doing." "It's the right thing to do," Barbara said simply. "Keep me updated on the toll booth installation. I'll make sure word gets around the community through proper channels so people can't claim they weren't warned." Over the next week, my property transformed into something resembling a small construction site. David had recommended a company that specialized in private security systems, and they installed 8 high-definition cameras covering every inch of my driveway, all connected to a cloud-based system that kept 30 days of rolling footage. They also installed 2 professional toll booth structures, one at each entrance to the driveway, complete with electronic payment readers, digital displays, and automatic license plate recognition cameras. The system was impressive. Drivers could pay via credit card, mobile app, or cash deposit. If someone drove through without paying, the system would automatically capture their license plate and send me an alert. The digital signs at both entrances were impossible to miss. Large, well-lit displays that read Private Toll Road $5 per vehicle, Unauthorized, use is trespassing. David had also prepared a comprehensive legal packet that included everything from the property survey, confirming the driveway was entirely on my land, to state statutes supporting private toll roads, to cease and desist templates I could send to anyone who used the road without paying. He'd even researched the process for filing civil suits to collect unpaid tolls plus penalties. The day before the official launch, Barbara sent out a community-wide email with the subject line, "Important update. Private property access on Meadowbrook Lane." The email was professional and factual, explaining that I was exercising my legal rights as a property owner to establish a toll road on my private driveway. She included a map showing the alternative public routes, and even calculated that the detour added only 6 minutes to the average commute. She ended with a reminder that using the private road without payment would constitute trespassing and could result in legal action. Karen's response came within 20 minutes. She sent her own email to her group of concerned residents, and I knew about it because 3 different neighbors forwarded it to me with messages of support. Karen's email was titled, "Fighting Back Against Property Tyranny," and it was exactly as dramatic as you'd expect. In her email, Karen claimed I was attempting to extort money from hard-working residents, that my toll booth was probably illegal and definitely unethical, and that she was consulting with attorneys about filing a class action lawsuit to establish a prescriptive easement. She encouraged residents to continue using the driveway to protect our community rights and promised that she would personally lead the charge. I forwarded the email to David, who was amused. Prescriptive easement. She clearly doesn't understand property law. You need years of continuous, open, and hostile use to establish one of those, and even then, it's difficult to prove. The previous owner's absence doesn't establish community rights. She's bluffing. Launch day was a Tuesday morning in May of 2023. I woke up early and did a final check of all the systems. Everything was operational. The cameras were recording, the payment readers were active, and the digital signs were displaying correctly. I made myself a pot of coffee and settled into my home office with a view of the main entrance. My computer was connected to the toll booth system, so I could monitor everything in real time. The first car arrived at 6:45 in the morning. It was a blue Honda Civic I didn't recognize, driven by a man who looked to be in his 30s. He stopped at the toll booth, red to see, and I watched his face go through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and then resignation. He pulled out his phone, scanned the QR code for mobile payment, and drove through. My computer pinged with a notification. Payment received $5. First customer. Over the next hour, 12 more cars came through. 9 of them paid without complaint. 3 of them turned around and took the alternative route, which was exactly what I'd expected. The system was working perfectly. Then, at 7:32, Karen's white Mercedes SUV pulled up to the toll booth. I watched on my monitor as she sat there, staring at the sign. She didn't move for at least 2 minutes. I could see her talking on her phone, gesturing angrily at the toll booth. Then she ended her call, and I watched as she deliberately drove around the payment gate without paying. My computer immediately registered her license plate. HOPRO. Alert. Vehicle entered without payment license plate. HOPRO captured. Trespassing violation recorded. I smiled and took a screenshot. Then I sent a text message to David. Karen just drove through without paying. We have her on camera and license plate. His response came back immediately. Perfect. I'll draft the cease and desist letter today. She gets one warning. Then we escalate. By noon, I'd processed 43 payments totaling $215, and I'd captured 6 violations, including Karen's Mercedes, twice more. She was using the road for round trips, which meant she was racking up violations at $10 per incident. That afternoon, David sent certified letters to all 6 violators, including Karen. The letters were polite but firm, stating that they had been recorded using private property without authorization, that they owed the toll fee plus a $50 processing fee for the violation, and that continued unauthorized use would result in trespassing charges being filed with local law enforcement. 5 of the 6 violators paid immediately through the online portal, including the processing fee. Their payments came in within hours of receiving the letters, along with apologetic messages saying they hadn't realized the system was serious or they'd been in a hurry and forgotten to pay. Karen was the exception. Instead of paying, she showed up at my door at 6 in the evening, waving the certified letter like a weapon. I watched her approach through my security camera and decided to record the interaction on my phone before opening the door. "This is illegal," Karen shouted before I even had the door fully open. "You can't charge people to use a community road." "It's not a community road, Karen. It's my private property," Primera sighed calmly. "The deed is clear. There are no easements, and I have every legal right to charge for access. I'm not paying this ridiculous fee, and I'm certainly not paying your fake processing charge." She thrust the letter at me. "This is extortion." "It's not extortion. It's a toll road on private property," I explained patiently. "You're welcome to use the public roads like everyone else. But if you use my property without paying, you're trespassing, and I will press charges. You can't have me arrested for driving on a road." Karen sputtered. "Actually, I can. You're using private property without permission. That's the definition of trespassing." I showed her my phone, where I had pulled up the screenshots of her 3 violations from that morning. "I have video evidence, time-stamp data, and automatic license plate recognition. You owe $15 in toll fees, plus $150 in processing fees. Pay now, or I'll be filing charges with the sheriff's department tomorrow." Karen's face went through several shades of red. "This isn't over. Marcus, I'm going to make sure everyone in this community knows what kind of person you are." "Feel free," I said, "but you might want to pay your fees first. The price goes up every day you're in violation." She turned and stormed back to her Mercedes, which she'd parked illegally in my driveway without permission. As she drove away, I noticed she went back through the toll booth again, without paying. That was violation number 4. I sent the new footage to David with a simple message. She just added another violation. In front of my house, on camera, after being formally warned, David's response: "Call the sheriff. Let's make this official." I sat in my home office, staring at the sheriff's non-emergency number on my computer screen. This was the moment of truth. I could let this go, except that Karen was going to be a problem and just deal with it informally, or I could actually follow through with legal consequences. The old Marcus, the one who just wanted to live quietly and avoid conflict, was tempted to let it slide. But that Marcus had already been spray-painted, harassed, and openly the new Marcus, the one who'd installed a toll booth on his own property and meant every word of his warnings, picked up the phone and dialed. As the line rang, I pulled up the video footage of Karen's most recent violation, the one where she'd driven through my property just minutes after being warned that I would press charges. I had everything documented. Timestamps, license plates, video evidence, certified mail receipts proving she'd been warned. When the dispatcher answered, I took a deep breath and said 6 words that would change everything. "I need to report a trespassing violation." Karen wanted a war. She was about to find out what happened when you picked a fight with someone who had better lawyers and all the evidence. Would you have pressed charges against Karen? Or would you have let her keep violating your property rights? Have you ever had to call the police on a neighbor? Drop your stories in the comments. And if you're wondering what happened when the sheriff showed up at Karen's door, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, Karen's reaction to being officially charged with trespassing is absolutely priceless, and Barbara's response is even better. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Sheriff Deputy James Morrison arrived at my house 45 minutes after my call. He was a tall man in his early 50s, with a calm, professional demeanor that immediately put me at ease. I'd prepared everything, printed screenshots of all 4 violations with the video footage queued up on my laptop, copies of the certified mail receipts showing Karen had been formally warned, and the complete property deed documentation proving my ownership. Mr. Rivera, Deputy Morrison said, settling into my kitchen chair and opening his notepad. Walk me through what's been happening here. I gave him the complete timeline, starting from when I moved in and discovered the traffic, through Barbara's supportive response, Karen's hostile opposition, the vandalism, the toll booth installation, and finally Karen's repeated violations despite written warnings. Deputy Morrison took detailed notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he looked at the evidence I'd compiled. This is probably the most well-documented trespassing case I've ever seen, he said with a slight smile. You have video evidence, automatic license plate capture, certified mail proving you warned the violator, and clear signage posted. Mr. Rivera, you've done everything by the book. So you can press charges? I asked. Absolutely. These is clear-cut. Trespassing, multiple violations, with warnings, ignored. He made a note. The fact that you offered a legal way to use the road by paying the toll actually strengthens your case. You're not blocking access entirely. You're simply charging for use of your private property, which is completely within your rights. He looked up from his notes. I'll need copies of everything you've shown me, and then I'll go have a conversation with Ms. Walsh. I provided Deputy Morrison with a USB drive containing all the evidence, plus printed copies of the key documents. He thanked me and headed out. I'll be in touch after I speak with her. And Mr. Rivera, keep documenting everything. Something tells me this isn't going to end quietly. He was right about that. I found out later from Barbara what happened when Deputy Morrison showed up at Karen's house. Karen had apparently been hosting a strategy meeting with her group of supporters, planning their next move against my illegal toll booth. Deputy Morrison's arrival, in full uniform with his patrol car parked prominently in her driveway, had interrupted their meeting quite dramatically. According to Barbara, who heard it from 3 different residents who'd been at the meeting, Karen had initially tried to play the victim, claiming I was harassing her and that the toll booth was illegal. Deputy Morrison had calmly explained that no, the toll booth was completely legal, and that she had been recorded committing 4 separate counts of trespassing on private property, despite receiving formal written warnings. Karen had demanded to see the evidence. Deputy Morrison had shown her the screenshots and explained that video footage was also available. Karen had then insisted that she had a right to use the road because of community precedent. Deputy Morrison had patiently explained that property law didn't work that way, and that she needed to either pay the outstanding tolls and fees or face formal trespassing charges. Karen had refused both options and demanded to speak to his supervisor. That's when things got interesting. Deputy Morrison had called his sergeant, who came out to Karen's house and reviewed the same evidence. The sergeant had been even less sympathetic than Deputy Morrison. He'd told Karen directly that if she used my driveway even one more time without paying, she would be arrested for trespassing, not cited. Arrested, Karen's supporters had apparently started leaving at that point, several of them looking extremely uncomfortable with how the situation was developing. Barbara told me that at least 5 of them approached her privately afterward to apologize for getting involved in Karen's vendetta and to ask for information about the alternative routes. That evening, I received an email from Karen's attorney. The email was professionally written and much more reasonable than anything Karen had said to me directly. It acknowledged that I had the legal right to control access to my property, but requested a meeting to discuss a reasonable resolution that would serve the interests of all parties. I forwarded the email to David, who responded within an hour. This means we're winning. She's trying to negotiate because she knows she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on. Let me handle this. David scheduled a meeting for the following Tuesday at a neutral location, a conference room at the local library. Attending would be David and myself, Karen and her attorney, and Barbara as a neutral HOA representative. David had been clear about his strategy. We would listen to their proposal, but we weren't backing down from our legal position. The meeting was tense from the moment we walked in. Karen's attorney, a man named Robert Sterling, was professional and polite. Karen herself looked like she wanted to leap across the table at me, but she was clearly under strict instructions to let her lawyer do the talking. Barbara arrived looking professional as always, in her signature red blazer and red-framed glasses, carrying a leather portfolio, and wearing an expression that suggested she was prepared for anything. She greeted everyone with equal courtesy, then took her seat at the head of the table. Positioning herself literally and figuratively as the neutral authority, Sterling opened the discussion. Thank you all for coming. I think we can all agree that the current situation isn't ideal for anyone. My client has concerns about the toll booth and its impact on community harmony. Mr. Rivera has legitimate concerns about his property rights. I'm hopeful we can find middle ground. What exactly are you proposing? David asked, his tone neutral, but with an edge that suggested he already knew this was going to be a waste of time. Sterling glanced at his notes. We'd like to propose that Mr. Rivera remove the toll booth and associated infrastructure in exchange for a formal written agreement from the HOA and interested residents that they will limit use of the driveway to emergency situations only. We're also prepared to offer compensation for the installation costs Mr. Rivera has already incurred. How much compensation? David asked. We're prepared to offer $2,000. Sterling sighed. David didn't even pause. The toll booth installation cost $12,000. The legal fees we've incurred preparing documentation and cease and desist letters total another $4,000. The security camera system was $8,000. So we're at $24,000 in expenses. And you're offering $2,000? He smiled coldly. That's not a serious proposal, Counselor. Barbara raised her hand slightly, and everyone turned to her. If I may, she said calmly, her red glasses catching the light. I want to be very clear about the HOA's position in this matter. The HOA has no authority to negotiate access to private property that is not part of the community common areas. The driveway in question belongs entirely to Mr. Rivera. Any agreement regarding its use is between Mr. Rivera and individual residents, not the HOA as an organization. She looked directly at Karen. Furthermore, I want to state for the record that Mr. Rivera has been nothing but cooperative and legal in his actions. He has every right to charge for use of his property, and the HOA supports that right fully. What I don't support, and what the board doesn't support, is the harassment and vandalism that has been directed at Mr. Rivera. Karen's face flushed red, but Sterling put a hand on her arm before she could respond. What would you consider a fair resolution, Mr. Chun? Sterling asked David, clearly trying to regain control of the negotiation. I'll tell you what's fair, David said, leaning forward. The toll booth stays. It's legal, it's properly documented, and it's operating exactly as intended. Anyone who wants to use the road pays the $5 fee. Anyone who doesn't want to pay uses the public roads, which add approximately 6 minutes to the commute. Those are the options. He paused. However, I am prepared to offer one concession. Mr. Rivera will waive the outstanding fees and penalties currently owed by Ms. Walsh and the other violators, totaling approximately $300, provided there are no further violations and no further harassment of my client. Sterling looked at Karen, who was gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles were white. Can you give us a moment to confer? He asked. Barbara, David, and I stepped out into the library hallway. Barbara was smiling. Your attorney is good, she said to me quietly. The best. I agreed. Karen's not going to accept this, Barbara predicted. She can't stand losing, but her attorney knows she doesn't have a legal leg to stand on, and I think he's going to pressure her to take the deal. Barbara was partially right. When we returned to the conference room 5 minutes later, Sterling looked frustrated and Karen looked mute. My client agrees to no further use of the driveway and no further contact with Mr. Rivera, Sterling said carefully. However, she cannot agree to terms that she feels legitimize what she believes is an unfair situation. She will not acknowledge the legality of the toll booth. She doesn't have to acknowledge it, David said simply. The law acknowledges it. That's sufficient. Does she accept the waiver of outstanding fees in exchange for no further violations and no further harassment? Sterling looked at Karen, who gave a single, sharp nod. Yes, Sterling said. We accept those terms. Excellent, David said. He pulled out a document he'd already prepared. I'll need both Ms. Walsh and Mr. Rivera to sign this agreement, and Ms. Henderson as a witness. We'll Sined. The meeting was over in less than an hour, but it felt like a victory. Karen had been forced to admit, at least implicitly, that she couldn't win this fight legally. As we gathered our things to leave, Barbara caught Karen's eye. Karen, I hope this can be the end of the hostility. Marcus is a member of our community, and he deserves the same respect we'd show to anyone else. Karen didn't respond. She just grabbed her purse and walked out, Sterling following her with an apologetic look at the rest of us. After they left, Barbara turned to me with a warm smile and raised her hand for a high. I laughed and met her hand with mine. You did good, Marcus, she said. Standing up for your rights isn't always easy, but you handled this perfectly. I couldn't have done it without your support, I said honestly. Thank you for having my back through all of this. That's what good HOA presidents do, Barbara said, adjusting her red glasses with a smile. We protect our residents' rights, not violate them. For the next 2 weeks, everything was quiet. The toll booth processed an average of 15 to 20 paying customers per day, generating roughly $100 daily. Most people paid without complaint, some even leaving notes through the system saying they appreciated having the shortcut option available. A few residents approached me at community events to apologize for initially supporting Karen's position, saying they hadn't understood the full situation. Karen kept her distance. I saw her occasionally at community events, but she never acknowledged me, and she never used my driveway. Her white Mercedes became a regular sight on the alternative route, which actually made me a little sad. For all her flaws, she genuinely believed she was fighting for community rights. She just hadn't understood that community rights don't include the right to use someone else's private property. Then, 3 weeks after our library meeting, I got a call from Deputy Morrison. Mr. Rivera, this is Deputy Morrison. I wanted to give you a heads up about something. We've received multiple reports about a woman matching Ms. Walsh's description tampering with traffic signs in your area. The reports started about a week ago. Someone's been putting up unofficial signs near your property with messages like alternative route ahead and private toll road, use public streets. The signs are being placed on public property, so they're not technically illegal, but they're not authorized by the county either. Is she allowed to do that? I asked. It's a gray area, Morrison admitted. If she's placing them on public right-of-way without permits, the county can remove them and potentially fine her. But proving she's the one placing them is difficult unless we catch her in the act. I just wanted you to know in case you notice any escalation. I thanked him and ended the call, then immediately called Barbara. I've heard about the signs, Barbara said before I could even explain why I was calling. Several residents have mentioned them to me. Marcus, I think Karen is trying to find ways to oppose you that don't technically violate the agreement. She's not using your driveway. She's not contacting you directly, but she's still trying to undermine the toll booth. What should I do? I asked. Document it, Barbara advised. Take photos of the signs, note their locations, and when they appear, if she escalates to something that actually violates the agreement or breaks the law, we'll have a pattern of behavior to show authorities. But for now, I'd say, let it go. The signs are annoying, but they're not really hurting your business, are they? She was right. The toll booth was still processing 15 to 20 customers daily. A few handwritten signs weren't going to change that. I decided to take Barbara's advice and simply document everything, while otherwise ignoring it. But Karen wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. It was a Thursday evening in early June of 2023 when my security system sent me an alert that would change everything. Motion detected at North Toll Booth. Multiple persons. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone and felt my stomach drop. Karen's Mercedes was parked at the toll booth, along with 2 other vehicles I didn't recognize. But what really caught my attention was the equipment. Karen and 4 other people were setting up what looked like surveying gear, complete with a tripod and measuring devices. They were taking measurements of my driveway, photographing the toll booth from multiple angles, and one person appeared to be using a GPS device to mark coordinates. This wasn't random vandalism or simple harassment. This was organized, deliberate, and professional. Karen was planning something big. I immediately started recording everything on my phone while simultaneously calling David. As his phone rang, I watched Karen direct her team like a general commanding troops, pointing at different sections of my property and making notes on a clipboard. Whatever she was planning, it involved serious research and probably serious money. When David answered, I didn't waste time with pleasantries. We have a problem. Karen's at my toll booth right now with the surveying team, and I think she's planning something that's going to make everything we've dealt with so far look like a minor inconvenience. David's response was immediate and deadly serious. Don't confront them. Keep recording. I'm calling an emergency meeting with Barbara, and we need to figure out what she's up to before she makes her next move. As I watched Karen and her team pack up their equipment and drive away, I had a sinking feeling that our legal victory had only been round one. Karen was preparing for round two, and this time she was bringing professionals. What do you think Karen is planning with that surveying team? Have you ever had a neighbor who just wouldn't let something go, no matter how many times they lost? Share your theories and stories in the comments. If you want to find out what Karen's secret plan is and how Marcus and Barbara respond to this new threat, stay tuned. I'm not exaggerating when I say the final confrontation will blow your mind. Make sure you subscribe with notifications on. You don't want to miss how this epic battle ends. Trust me, it's absolutely worth it. The emergency meeting with David and Barbara took place at Barbara's HOA office the next morning. I brought my laptop with all the surveillance footage from the previous night, and we watched the videos together in stunned silence. The surveying team had spent nearly 2 hours on my property, taking measurements, photographs, and GPS coordinates. They'd been thorough and professional, which made the whole situation even more concerning. This is preparation for a legal challenge, David said immediately, pausing the video on a frame that showed Karen directing someone with a measuring tape. She's hiring experts to build a case. My guess is she's going to claim either adverse possession or prescriptive easement, and she wants professional survey data to support it. Can she do that? I asked, feeling a knot of worry in my stomach. We already settled this. She can try, David said. But here's the thing. Both adverse possession and prescriptive easement require years of continuous use, usually 10 to 20 years, depending on the state. The previous owner was absent, but that doesn't establish anyone else's right to the property, and you've only owned it for a few months, during which time you've actively opposed the trespassing. He pointed at the screen. This surveying work is expensive. She's spending thousands of dollars to build a case that has almost no chance of success. Barbara leaned back in her chair, adjusting her red glasses thoughtfully. Karen has always been stubborn, but this is something else. This is obsessive. She's spending her own money to fight a battle she's already lost legally. She looked at me with concern. Marcus, I think we need to be prepared for Karen to file some kind of lawsuit. Even if it's frivolous, you'll need to respond to it. Let her file, David said confidently. We have ironclad documentation. Clear property deed with no easement. Immediate opposition to trespassing once you took ownership. Proper legal notices, and you're even providing paid access so you're not blocking the road entirely. No judge is going to side with her. He smiled grimly. And when she loses, we can file for attorney's fees and costs. She'll end up paying for our defense. I felt a bit better after that meeting, but I also knew David was right. We were in for another fight. Karen wasn't going to give up until she'd exhausted every possible option, no matter how unlikely to succeed. 2 weeks later, I received formal legal notice that Karen Walsh, along with 17 other residents, were filing a civil lawsuit against me seeking to establish a prescriptive easement over my driveway. The lawsuit claimed that the road had been used by the community for over 15 years, that this use was open and notorious, and that it had been adverse to the rights of the previous owner. They were asking the court to grant them permanent right of access without payment. David read through the filing and laughed. Actually, laughed. This is one of the weakest easement claims I've ever seen. Their own filing admits that the previous owner was largely absent and never gave permission, which actually helps our case. They're trying to claim adverse possession against an absent owner, which is notoriously difficult to prove. He made notes on the document. We'll file our response next week. This won't even make it to trial. Barbara called me that same afternoon. I heard about the lawsuit. I want you to know that the HOA board held an emergency meeting this morning, and we voted unanimously to issue a formal statement supporting your position. We're also sending a letter to all the residents who joined Karen's lawsuit, reminding them that the HOA does not support this action and that they're acting as private citizens, not as representatives of the community. Thank you, Barbara, I said, genuinely moved by her continued support. This means a lot. Marcus, you're a good neighbor and a good member of this community, Barbara said warmly. Karen is on the wrong side of this, both legally and ethically. The board and I are going to make sure everyone knows that. Over the next 6 weeks, David and I prepared our defense. We compiled every piece of evidence. The property deed and survey, documentation of the previous owner's absence, proof that I'd immediately opposed the trespassing upon taking ownership, records of all the toll booth transactions showing I wasn't blocking access entirely, and even testimonies from the 5 residents who'd initially violated the toll policy, but then apologized and paid. David also did something clever. Researched Karen's background and discovered that she'd only lived in the community for 8 years, not the 15 years that the road had allegedly been used as a shortcut. This meant she personally couldn't claim continuous use for the full period required for adverse possession. Several of the other plaintiffs were in similar situations. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for mid-August of 2023. David was confident, but I was nervous. I'd never been involved in a lawsuit before, and the idea of standing in front of a judge while Karen and her group argued that they had a right to my property was deeply unsettling. Barbara offered to attend the hearing as a character witness if needed, and I gratefully accepted. On the day of the hearing, she showed up in her signature red blazer and red-framed glasses, carrying a leather portfolio full of HOA documentation supporting my position. The hearing took place in a small courtroom at the county courthouse. Judge Margaret Reynolds presided, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Karen and her 17 co-plaintiffs sat on one side with their attorney, Robert Sterling. David Barba and I sat on the other side. Sterling presented his case first. He argued that the community had used the road openly and continuously for 15 years, that this use was well known and accepted, and that my sudden imposition of a toll booth disrupted long-established community patterns. He presented the surveying data Karen had collected, along with testimony from several plaintiffs about their use of the road over the years. Then it was David's turn, and he was magnificent. "Your Honor," David began, standing and approaching the bench with our evidence binder, "the plaintiff's case rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of property law. Adverse possession and prescriptive easement require use that is hostile to the owner's rights, but the previous owner was largely absent and never gave permission, which means the community's use was simply trespassing on unoccupied property, not the establishment of legal rights." He opened the binder. When Mr. Rivera took ownership in March of this year, he immediately asserted his property rights. The plaintiffs have no claim to continuous adverse use against him. David then systematically dismantled every argument Sterling had made. He showed that Karen herself had only lived in the community for 8 years, less than the minimum required for adverse possession. He demonstrated that 12 of the 18 plaintiffs had lived there for less than 10 years. He presented evidence that I had opposed the trespassing from day one, and had offered a legal alternative through the toll booth, which proved I wasn't blocking access entirely. Finally, David presented Barbara's testimony. Barbara stood up, adjusted her red glasses, and addressed the judge with calm authority. "Your Honor, I'm Barbara Henderson, president of the Sunset Ridge HOA. I want to make it clear that the HOA does not support this lawsuit and believes Mr. Rivera is completely within his rights to control access to his private property. The road in question is not part of the HOA common areas, and never has been. The HOA board voted 7-2 against supporting community use of Mr. Rivera's driveway, with the vice president, Karen Walsh, being one of the dissenting votes. She paused. This lawsuit is not about community rights. It's about one individual's refusal to accept a legal property boundary. Judge Reynolds listened to everything, took notes, and then called a 15-minute recess to review the evidence. When she returned, her decision was swift and unequivocal. "I've reviewed all the evidence and arguments presented today," Judge Reynolds said, looking directly at Karen and her co-plaintiffs. "The plaintiff's claim for prescriptive easement fails on multiple grounds. First, the previous owner's absence does not establish adverse use. It simply means the property was unoccupied. Second, Mr. Rivera asserted his property rights immediately upon taking ownership, which breaks any claim of continuous adverse use. Third, the plaintiffs have failed to demonstrate that they meet the statutory requirements for duration of use, with many plaintiffs having resided in the community for less than the required period." She closed the file in front of her with a decisive thump. "The motion for prescriptive easement is denied. Furthermore, I'm awarding attorney's fees and costs to the defendant, Mr. Rivera, in the amount of $18,000, to be paid jointly and severally by the plaintiffs. This case was frivolous and should never have been filed. The plaintiffs are fortunate I'm not sanctioning their attorney for bringing such a weak claim." She looked at Karen specifically. "Ms. Walsh, I suggest you accept that Mr. Rivera owns his property and has the right to control it. This court will not tolerate further harassment disguised as legal action." The gavel came down, and it was over. Karen's face was white with shock and anger. Sterling looked embarrassed, and quickly gathered his papers. The 17 other plaintiffs looked devastated as they realized they were each going to be responsible for paying a share of $18,000 in legal fees. Outside the courtroom, Barbara gave me another high five, this one much more enthusiastic than the last. "That was perfect," she said, laughing with relief. "Did you see Karen's face when the judge said the case was frivolous? I almost felt sorry for her," I admitted. "Almost." "Don't," Barbara said firmly. "She brought this on herself. She could have accepted your property rights months ago, paid a $5 toll when she needed to use the shortcut, and moved on with her life. Instead, she harassed you, vandalized your property, organized a lawsuit, and dragged 17 other people into a legal disaster. She earned every bit of what just happened." David emerged from the courtroom a few minutes later, grinning broadly. "That went even better than I expected. Judge Reynolds doesn't usually award the full amount of attorney's fees, but she was clearly annoyed by how weak their case was." He shook my hand. "Congratulations, Marcus. This is completely over now. Karen has no more legal options, and I seriously doubt she risked another confrontation after that dressing down from the judge." He was right. Over the following weeks, 8 of the 17 co-plaintiffs approached me privately to apologize. Most of them admitted that Karen had convinced them the lawsuit was a sure thing, and that they'd only joined because they thought it would be an easy win. Now they were facing legal bills they couldn't afford and were desperate to make amends. I was surprisingly sympathetic. These weren't bad people. They'd just been misled by someone they trusted. I worked out payment plans with most of them, allowing them to pay their share of the $18,000 over time rather than all at once. Several of them became regular toll booth customers, saying they appreciated having the shortcut option available and didn't mind paying $5 for the convenience. Karen, however, never apologized. She paid her share of the legal fees, exactly $1,058.82, in a single check delivered by certified mail with no accompanying note. After that, I never saw her use my driveway again. In fact, I barely saw her at all. She stopped attending most HOA meetings and events, and 6 months later, I heard through the community grapevine that she'd resigned as vice president. Barbara called me when she heard the news. Karen submitted her resignation letter this morning. She cited personal reasons, but we all know what really happened. She lost credibility with the community after the lawsuit disaster, and she couldn't handle being in a position where people questioned her judgment. "How do you feel about it?" I asked. Barbara was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, Relieved. Karen was always difficult to work with, but after her vendetta against you, it became impossible. The board was considering asking for her resignation anyway. This way, she gets to leave with some dignity. She paused, and Marcus, thank you for handling all of this with such grace. You could have been vindictive, but you weren't. You just stood up for your rights and let the legal system work. That's exactly how these situations should be handled. As I write this in December of nearly 3 years after I first moved into 173 Meadowbrook Lane, the toll booth is still operating. It processes an average of 12 to 15 transactions per day, generating roughly $60 to $75 daily, or about $2,000 per month. Over the 3 years of operation, the toll booth has generated approximately $72,000 in revenue, more than covering the initial installation costs and legal fees, while actually providing a useful service to residents who value their time. The money goes into a dedicated account that I use for property maintenance and improvements. I've used toll revenues to repave the entire driveway, install decorative lighting along its length, and even plant new oak trees to replace some that had died. The driveway is now the nicest private road in the community, and I like to think that the people who pay to use it are getting good value for their $5. Barbara and I have become genuine friends. She was re-elected as HOA president twice since the toll booth incident, each time by overwhelming margins. She tells me that the community is more harmonious now than it's been in years, partly because my stand against harassment set a precedent that the HOA will protect residents' rights rather than enabling entitled behavior. As for Karen, I heard she moved out of Sunset Ridge about a year ago. Someone told me she bought a condo in a different part of the city, somewhere without an HOA. I hope she's happier there. I genuinely do. I never wanted to be her enemy. I just wanted to protect my property rights. The most interesting development came last month, when the county actually approached me about potentially expanding the toll road system. Apparently, my driveway has become so popular as a paid shortcut that the county is considering implementing similar toll roads on other private properties, with revenue-sharing agreements between the property owners and the county for maintenance costs. I'm still considering their proposal, but it's funny how something that started as a defensive measure to stop trespassing has turned into what might become a model for public-private infrastructure partnerships. Looking back on everything that happened, I'm proud of how I handled it. I didn't back down when Karen tried to bully me, but I also didn't escalate unnecessarily. I followed the law, documented everything, worked with good professionals like David and Barbara, and let the legal system work as it's supposed to. The toll booth wasn't about revenge or being petty. It was about asserting a fundamental property right in a way that was both legal and actually beneficial to people who wanted to use the shortcut. To anyone facing a similar situation with an HOA or entitled neighbors, stand your ground, document everything, get good legal advice, and don't be afraid to assert your rights. Property ownership means something, and you don't have to tolerate people who think their convenience matters more than your legal rights. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just charging $5 per vehicle and watching people voluntarily pay for the privilege of using your property legally. The toll booth stands today as a monument to property rights, legal persistence, and the idea that sometimes the best way to win a fight is to turn your opponent's entitlement into your business opportunity. Karen wanted to use my road for free. Instead, she ended up paying over $1,000 in legal fees and losing her position in the community. Meanwhile, I'm generating steady income from something I would have been happy to protect for free. Every time I see that digital sign light up with another $5 transaction, I smile. Not because I'm making money, though that's nice. I smile because it represents something important. The principle that property rights matter, that laws exist for a reason, and that standing up for yourself, even when it's difficult and uncomfortable, is always worth it in the end. The toll booth isn't going anywhere. And neither am I. What an incredible journey. From Karen's first hostile confrontation to her eventual resignation and move out of the community, Marcus stood firm on his property rights and turned a harassment situation into a legitimate business opportunity. Would you have handled it the same way? Have you ever had to take legal action against a neighbor or HOA member? Share your stories in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this saga of property rights, justice, and the world's most expensive shortcut, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and check out our other HOA drama stories. We've got dozens of stories about neighbors, HOAs, and property disputes that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best revenge is just charging $5 per vehicle.